Boa noite a todos e todas. Sou Paulo Barros, professor voluntário do Vivendo Valores da Educação, e o nosso programa de hoje, produzido pela Centro Virtual da Brahma Kumaris, que é destinado ao Vivendo Valores da Educação. Nós temos a honra de receber a professora, palestrante, escritora Helen Sayers. Ela é britânica e ela tem uma larga experiência como palestrante, e conduz workshops, oficinas em diferentes partes do mundo, e é uma das principais facilitadoras do Vivendo Valores da Educação, inclusive com quem eu tive a honra de fazer duas formações do Vive na Inglaterra, nas quais ela colaborou. Ela escreveu esse livro, Ubuntu, Espírito da Humanidade, baseado em suas experiências como facilitadora e professora do Vivendo Valores da Educação, e também com a sua experiência de ter vivido e visitado muitos países africanos. O Ubuntu, em poucas palavras, é uma filosofia praticada por muitas comunidades africanas. É uma palavra que é associada a duas línguas, a Xhosa e a Ubuntu, e a Zulu, da África do Sul e países vizinhos. E é uma filosofia muito interessante que pratica a essência da humanidade, nossos valores. Então, se, Helen é a nossa convidada especial, como eu disse, ela vai falar sobre a maravilha, a experiência dela e o objetivo de escrever esse livro dedicado a professores e estudantes. Hello, Helen, welcome. Good evening. It's a
Hello.
pleasure for us from Brazilian Living Values having you with us.
Thank you very much. Obrigado. It's lovely to be with you. And we've been talking about this for some time. We've been talking about Ubuntu for a long time. We've been talking about getting the book printed for a long time. And now it feels as if things are starting to come together in a very beautiful way. So let me share some of my experiences. Because Ubuntu is a word, and you can find definitions on the internet. And in fact, when I first started looking into and researching Ubuntu, I remember looking on Google, and there were 20 references to Ubuntu and Ubuntu projects. And now, if you go onto Google, you will find 20 million, at least, I think. And so it really has become a household word, you might say, and many people are aware of it. But for me, the most important thing is the experience of Ubuntu. And this is the aim of this project that you've just introduced, Paulo, and with the book and the workshops that go with it, is to try to help people to actually feel and experience Ubuntu. And let me share a few of my own personal experiences as an introduction. Quite often when you find Ubuntu online somewhere, there's a little sentence that goes with it. It says, I am because we are. So in other words, my identity and who I am is all connected with my family, the people I interact with, and ultimately the whole world. So it's talking very much about our interconnectedness as humanity. Now, when I first went to Africa, I think I was about 21 years old, and I took up a post in Kenya, a teaching post for 3 years. And then after that, I went on to Swaziland, again as a teacher, and I was there for another 3 years. And I went totally on my own without knowing anyone. And very quickly, in fact, almost the moment I stepped off the plane in Kenya, I felt this warmth. It was, of course, the warmth of the sunshine, but it was also this human warmth. The smiles were just everywhere, and the feeling of being accepted and of belonging hit me immediately. Now, in places in Southern Africa, the greeting is sawubona, and this word means I see you. And it doesn't literally mean I'm looking at you and I see you with my eyes, but it means really I recognize you, I feel you. In fact, it really, to me, it means I see the soul. I see the very essence of you. And so right from the greetings, and the greetings would go on for a while. It would be sawubona, unjani, ngikona, unjani wena. You would have this exchange, almost like a ritual, which would last a little while. How are you? How's your family? How's your health? And the answers are always yes, and I'm fine, and my family's fine. So the greeting was a positive exchange between two souls. And the effect of that was to make you feel welcome and to get to know you from the very first exchange. And people would greet each other like this. Whereas I find here in Europe, it's just a quick hello, and then you continue with your business. And so this really touched me. In fact, sometimes I would walk into town to do some shopping. This was in Swaziland. And every other person you met would say sawubona, unjani, etc. And you would have this greeting ceremony with every other person on the way to town. And by the time I got to town, I would have spent about half an hour just greeting people on the way. And it was the same on the way back. So I had to give myself a lot of extra time when I went shopping just for the greeting. And you would go walking into the hills, which is something I love to do, go into the countryside, and people would come out from their homes and greet you, and they would always have something to give you. And they would give you a glass of water, and if possible, they wanted to give you a meal. They just wanted to give. There was no feeling of wanting something in return. It was this feeling of giving. And I remember at the school where I was teaching at in Swaziland, I was living on a campus with other teachers with different cottages all around mine. And my first thought was, I don't have any privacy. I need to have a fence around my house so that I can be on my own and be in private. Otherwise, other people can see me when I'm in my garden. So I asked the head teacher if I could. This was an African school, and the head teacher was a lovely African lady. And I said, would it be possible to have a fence around my house? And she looked at me as if to say, oh, this young white lady, what does she mean by this? And so I explained, and she said, yes, of course. So she got the head gardener to come along, and he started digging holes and putting these big wooden fences in. And this attracted a crowd of children and village people, all came around to see what was happening, and this new teacher from England. And I suddenly realized that this just wasn't the thing to do. And so I said to the gardener, I'm very sorry, but I've changed my mind. Can you take the fence back? I've decided I don't want a fence. And so he looked at me and very kindly took out the 3 or 4 poles that he'd put in, and off he went. And then I realized that I've come into a community style living, and I must be part of it. Otherwise, I'm going to exclude myself. And it was wonderful being able to go into the garden and wave to everyone, and people came right up to you. So I got to know people very, very quickly. And so this was my first experience. And when I left the country, it was very touching. I prepared, someone was coming to pick me up to take me to the airport. And 10 minutes before that, there was a knock on the door. And I thought, well, who could this be? I'm just about to leave. And I opened the door, and there in front of me was a line of local people who'd come to say goodbye. And I don't know even how they knew that I was leaving, but somehow the news got around.
Mhm.
And there were people like the little lady at the market who used to sell me the best mangoes. She had found her way there. And the school secretary who used to teach me the local language, she was there. The little old man who sat on the street corner waving to me in the morning when I passed him on my way to school. 2 little boys who used to come and climb the tree in my garden. It was quite incredible. And each one took my hands in theirs, looked me in the eyes, and just gave me so many blessings. God, may God be with you. May you have happiness all your life. Words like this. And I felt a huge lump in my throat. And I thought, these are my true friends. These are the people who I gave my heart to, and they gave their hearts to me. And they'll probably never see me again, and I'll never see them again, but they wanted to come and just express their love towards me. I will never forget that. These are examples of Ubuntu, living together. I am because we are. But it's not that the people sort of get lost as part of the community, just all being as one. I found that the people I met in those countries were very individual, very unique, and very spontaneous, very easy to get on with. So it's not, Ubuntu isn't that we all become the same. It's that I am because we are. So the community is what really sort of makes my context in life, but also we are because I am. So I have a part, and a very important part, in being the best of myself, so that I share that with the community. So I always like to add, I am because we are, and we are because I am. Now,
Yeah.
I never heard the word Ubuntu in all the time I was there. No one ever said Ubuntu. But the day I learned about Ubuntu was a long time after I had left Africa, and I was living in Geneva. I was representing, with a few others, the Brahma Kumaris at the United Nations. And we were preparing, a team of us were preparing to take part in the World Conference Against Racism, which was about to happen in South Africa, in Durban. And we were all together and we were saying, this conference is going to be very tricky because a conference against racism, there's going to be a lot of arguments, a lot of debates, a lot of hot issues, talks about reparation, and it was going to be a tough conference. And we were saying to each other, what can we do that will bring something positive to the table? And one of the members of the group actually came from near Johannesburg, a place called Soweto, which is in fact quite famous for some terrible conflicts during the apartheid era. And this wonderful soul was with us, and he said, I know what we can do. We can run a panel discussion, and we'll call it Ubuntu, a force for living together. And so I said to him, what's that? What's Ubuntu? And he said, Helen, you've lived in Africa all those years and you don't know what Ubuntu is? And I said, please tell me. He started to describe what Ubuntu is, and I immediately recognized what it was that kept pulling me back to Africa. What was that nostalgia, that feeling of longing? And it was Ubuntu. So I became very enthusiastic about helping to coordinate this panel discussion, and we got some fascinating people on our panel. We had an ambassador from Rwanda. We had one of our members who is doing research in the sort of native people in one of his countries. There was a Zulu school teacher, people from a number of backgrounds who knew and understood this concept. The hall was packed. Now, usually at these United Nations panel discussions, you're lucky to have about 20 people, but this time the hall was packed. It was as if the title attracted people. And at one stage where it was a time of questions and answers, etc., this gentleman got up right in the middle of the room, and you could tell by his features that he came from North Indian American background and from the indigenous people. You could almost see the feathers coming out of his head and his beautiful nose that just reminded me of so many films that I'd seen of these wonderful people. And he got up and he said, "This is what our ancestors used to live, but we've lost it. How are we going to get it back together again?" And that was another key moment for me as well, was hearing him say that from a different part of the world, and his passionate cry for how can we get it back together again. And so I started with some friends organizing Ubuntu workshops back in Geneva, and I started researching Ubuntu. And the first thing I did was to read some books by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And he talks a lot about reconciliation and compassion. And when I was in Swaziland, Nelson Mandela was in prison. And I learned a lot about his philosophy of life, which was absolutely amazing. And I actually went to visit the cell where he was imprisoned. His total imprisonment was about 27 years. And I went to his cell on Robben Island, just off Cape Town in South Africa, where I learned so much about this amazing person and how he spent so many years in this tiny cell, which wasn't even long enough for him to stretch out. He had to stretch out across the diagonal line of his cell. And the janitors, the guards, were so rude and disrespectful to him at the beginning. They would call him a dog, they would spit at him, they would try to tease him, and he would always come out with a word of respect. He would never get angry or upset. And eventually he actually won the hearts of the people, those janitors. And in fact, when he finally became president, he invited them to the ceremony, and he put them in the front row. It was very touching. And of course, we're all familiar with his words when he first came into power. It was, let's make this a rainbow nation. It wasn't, let's kill the people who have hurt us. It was, let's forgive, let's forget. And then a whole process of reconciliation with the help of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So the more I read about this Ubuntu, and then I met someone amazing. His name was John Mfunaselwa Bengu, who actually was the world authority on Ubuntu. And I read a couple of his books and actually met him. And it was such an honor to meet people like this who lived this Ubuntu. I even got to know some of Nelson Mandela's comrades while I lived in Swaziland. I used to go and visit them in their hideouts. They had to hide because it was the time of the apartheid era. And I couldn't believe how these people who had been so cruelly treated could accept me as a friend. And I asked one of them, why is it that you consider me your friend? And look at the color of my skin. And he said, we have nothing against white people. It's just that some of them have a strange attitude. And that really struck a chord in me. And what I noticed when I was talking with these people, they weren't actually looking at my skin. It was a soul-to-soul connection. They were really, again, looking at me, sawubona. It was from here to there. And I think actually this chapter in my life you know, I'm talking about when I actually lived in Swaziland and in Kenya. This was very much part of my spiritual journey. I was getting this feeling of family, of connectedness, and this very spiritual connection that I had with these people. So another reason why I'm so keen on Ubuntu is that I can say that thanks to Ubuntu, I came into this spiritual family that I'm now very much part of, the Brahma Kumaris, and where I feel the same sense of connection and belongingness and this lovely spiritual greeting, the way in which we regard each other. I had felt that already in Africa. And so at one point, how was the book? How did that come into being? At one point, one of our senior members, Sister Gayatri from New York, she was writing a book on values. And she asked me if I could write a chapter on Ubuntu. And I said I would absolutely love to. And she gave me a framework of different topics that I needed to cover. And so I started to put all of my energy I was living in Oman at the time. And Oman also has this feeling of Ubuntu. The people are so gentle, so humble, so welcoming, that I was feeling this parallel between what I'd experienced in Africa and what I'd experienced in India on my visits to India. The Indian culture is also what I would call an Ubuntu culture. And in India, they have a word, Vasudeva, 2 words actually, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which means belonging to a global family. And the values are so similar to Ubuntu. And so Sister Gayatri asked me if I would write this chapter. And so I was back in Geneva, I was in Oman at the time, and I started to put my head down to it, getting ideas and quotations. And at one point I contacted her and I said, by the way, how long should this chapter be? And she said, oh, it should be about 6 pages. And I said, well, I'm already on page 7 and I'm still on the introduction. So she said, Helen, go ahead. I think you need to write a booklet on Ubuntu. And so I wrote what became from a chapter to a booklet to a book, which is now translated into 6 languages. And the most recent has been Brazilian Portuguese, which I'm so happy about. But actually, it's wrong of me to say I wrote it, because the number of people who have helped me, who have given me ideas, who have advised me, is a very long list. And at the beginning of the book, I've acknowledged a few of those people, but the list is very long. And a lot of the people in that list are people from the Living Values team, because through Living Values, I was able to adapt some of the workshops that I had practiced through Living Values, adapt them specifically for Ubuntu, and people would give me ideas. And then I would pilot a 2-day workshop, for example, in Italy, at a retreat center in Italy, and then in Germany, different places. And in Lisbon, we had a lovely 2-day Ubuntu retreat. And so thanks to these kind people who invited me to put it into practice, really, the project has come together. So that's just a little bit about the background of the project, my experience of Ubuntu. And I just wonder, Paulo, if there's anything you'd like to ask me, or any comments that you'd like to make?
Thank you, Helen. Amazing experience you have shared with us. The book is really inspiring.
Thank you.
I I remember when I met you the first time was in Oxford, twice maybe, and then in India, and you shared about this project, and you gave me a copy, something like that. And I start to use it in classrooms, and my experience have been very, very interesting because, as you said, as you observed that there is Ubuntu also in Oman, in different parts of the world, in Brazilian culture, it's possible to live, to see and experience cultural cultural things that are close to Ubuntu. No?
Yes.
As you know, many Africans people came to Brazil, no?
Mm,
And of course, I think that this experience has also in our culture. So I hope I'm sure that this book now in Portuguese is going to be inspiring, useful for teachers and students. And once more, I'd like to thank you for accepting the Brazilian Living Values invitation to come and share. And
it's a great pleasure for me. Thank you so much, Paulo. And I wish you all the best in your fantastic work that you're doing with living values. And I know you've been working with street children. And of course, you're a teacher in a school anyway. So you're putting all these wonderful values to use in every aspect of your life. And that is inspiring. That really is. I think this is how Ubuntu can be shared. It's when we live it. And just a final word here is one way that this has been very useful to me in my journey is that I catch myself every now and again if I'm feeling a bit unkind towards someone, or I'm having negative thoughts for someone, or wanting to tick someone off, or a bit of revenge, these sort of attitudes, I suddenly pull myself up and I say, Helen, that's not Ubuntu. So it's been very helpful as a sort of guideline for me. Um, and so that's what makes it very real.
yeah, this is my experience that when values are shared or thoughts relating to cultures,
Mm,
students understand them more
yeah,
deeply because they feel that it's a cultural experience. So
yes,
it's their own experience.
yes. It belongs to them.
Tá? Então, em nome do Vivendo Valores na Educação brasileiro, agradecemos a Helen Sayers, que veio compartilhar sobre a sua experiência com a cultura Ubuntu na África, em outras partes do mundo, e como ela se inspirou para escrever esse livro, que agora está em português e que vocês podem ter acesso. Obrigado a todos, obrigado, minha amiga Helen, por compartilhar coisas incríveis conosco. Thank you for sharing amazing things with us.
It's just been my pleasure. And thank you to your whole team there, because we had to translate the book from English into Portuguese. So you got your team together. We then had to put it all together in the format so that it could be printed. And so it was teamwork. And it was such a pleasure for me to work with your team in the spirit of Ubuntu.